St. Vith in Belgium, near the German border. This is the only place in the world where sourdoughs are preserved. Karl de Smedt takes care of 144 sourdough cultures from across the globe. Each is made up of flour and water, but no two are the same.
Here, I have a sourdough from Verona in Italy, and it's created based on cow dung. So this is a sourdough coming from Japan, and it has been created by one of the last samurai, and it's made out of cooked rice.
Every other month, it's feeding time at the Parata Sourdough Library. Then, all the doughs stored here are given the same particular flour type that was used to start the culture decades or even centuries ago. Karl de Smedt is the world's only sourdough librarian.
So we are feeding now the sourdoughs that we keep in the library, and this is actually the third feed. So we started yesterday morning with the first feed, yesterday afternoon a second feed, and then today we build it up until we have 500 grams that goes back in the jars, and then we put it in the library.
If not fed regularly, the sourdoughs would become overly acidic and kill the microorganisms inside. Even the ancient Egyptians were known to have kept sourdough starters for baking bread. The culture causes dough to rise and makes breads fluffier. But this knowledge is slowly fading into obscurity.
I went to bakery school and I only learned how to bake with yeast. And in all schools everywhere in the world, still today, sourdough is not something that is part of the daily education program, except in countries like Germany, Austria, Russia, the Nordic countries, where there is a rye culture. If you bake rye bread, you need acidification of the rye flour.
In the 19th century, Louis Pasteur discovered the basics for producing commercial yeast, giving the high-maintenance sourdough a run for its money. Soon, hardly anyone had the time to feed sourdough cultures.
By starting to use commercial yeast, we lost a part of our heritage, we lost a part of the complexity of the flavor in the bread, but also a part of the health benefits when it comes to digestibility and bioavailability of the minerals that you find in the grain.
Today, many bakeries use industrially produced, ready-made sourdough or sourdough extracts. They always taste the same and contribute nothing to the biodiversity of sourdoughs overall. Karl de Smedt only accepts sourdoughs into his library that were created through spontaneous fermentation. Each culture is a tiny miracle of grain and water, unique time capsules from history, and Karl de Smedt works to preserve them all. In July 2021, the Aar, a tributary of the River Rhine, turned into a raging torrent, killing at least 135 people. Many lost their homes, their belongings, their family keepsakes. Ingo Binnewerk had just built a home near the Aar River, in the small town of Sinzig. That summer, Ingo was on vacation in southern France.
Und unterwegs kriegten wir schon immer so Anrufe, Ingo.
And while we were on the road, we kept getting calls. Ingo, they're saying there's going to be torrential downpours. And the next day I got that infamous picture of the floods that had reached up to the gutters.
Die Dachrinne reingelaufen ist.
So I'm looking at this image, and I just can't believe it. Is that really my house? Is it a photo montage? What is it?
Ingo had just finished the house 3 years ago. He designed it himself and built it with the help of local craftspeople. It was his home. He was happy in it. On his way back from vacation, he was prepared for the worst.
You should have seen the pictures. You couldn't even drive in here. Everything was covered in mud. My furniture inside was tossed all over the place. There was furniture from the next-door neighbours. There was junk and a huge pile of bottles back there. Plastic bottles, glass bottles. They floated along back there and piled up here.
The entire ground floor was ruined. Keepsakes from his former life swept away. Ingo had studied tropical agriculture and spent 40 years working as a development worker in many African countries. There, he supported agricultural research and helped small businesses get off the ground. It was a formative time in his life.
I have a bunch of pictures in here, or I used to. Some are still there, from Africa, but sadly a lot are gone. And in a way, that's history that's been lost, or what's still hanging here today. I brought home a lot of clothes from Africa that I had had tailored there, all gone. My daughter's piano too, a lovely good piano.
He was able to salvage his dining table and chairs from Togo.
I
would have been very sad if I had lost everything. A whole lot of handcraft went into this. I gave my own input while these items were being made. I spoke with the carpenter about how it could be done. We became friends. We still have the chairs too. Hand-carved chairs from Togo. They survived because they're made out of tropical wood. It's a very dense wood that won't soften just from a bit of water.
It's now been a few years since the flooding. Ingo Binnenwerk had insurance, and his home is almost completely rebuilt now. In spite of the great loss, he's found a silver lining in it all.
A lot is gone, and now I'll think twice, even 3 times before replacing it. All the clothes I thought I needed, all gone. I don't even own a suit anymore, and that frees up space. It even frees up space in your mind.
Belongings can become a burden. But even if much of Sinzig has been rebuilt, things will never be the same.
We absolutely must preserve it. Not just in commemoration of everything we lost, but also the knowledge of what happened. All those who died. We need to work to ensure this doesn't happen again. When I built my house here, I wasn't aware of the fact that this had happened before, 100 years ago and 200 years ago.
The residents along the Ahr Valley won't forget the floods anytime soon. But what about in 20 years? Or 50? Will future generations still remember? In 2004, a fire destroyed large parts of the Duchess Anna Amalia Library, a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the German city of Weimar. Flames tore through the famous Rococo Hall. An estimated 50,000 books were destroyed. Books are classic repositories of knowledge. That's why the German National Library in Leipzig works to preserve books and other media. Since 1913, it has been mandated by the state to collect everything that has been published in or about Germany. The only exceptions it makes are for publications of temporary significance, such as mail order catalogs or train schedules. "21 million items are housed here: fiction and non-fiction books, encyclopedias, newspapers, no matter the language."
Here, for example, we have the Cumhuriyet Avrupa. It's a Turkish newspaper that was published in Mörfeld in Waldorf, and that's why we collect it, because it was published in Germany. Or this travel guide, written in Japanese, published in Japan, about a trip through Europe. If there are just 5 pages about Germany in there, we still want to have it, even if it's in Japanese. We want to reflect on what German culture is about in Germany and worldwide.
The collection is meant to be the nation's long-term cultural memory.
In a way, we are an institution for the ages, because we've collected millions of publications and will continue to collect millions more in all sorts of forms, so that way they are permanently available for study.
The library isn't choosy about content. Anything that's been published gets a place on its shelves.
Hier haben wir Hedwig Kurz Mahler, du hast mein Herz bezwungen. Das ist das.
Here we have Hedwig Kurt Mahler's You Have Subdued My Heart. Something like that doesn't fall under scientific literature. We have it under kiosk literature because it's something you used to be able to, or still could, buy at a kiosk. Or here's something I used to read as a boy, which was by no means scientific. Jerry Cotton, G-Man. In parts, we are the last place in Germany or even in the world to keep literature like this, which is of great interest for various branches of study.
Literatur, die für verschiedene Wissenschaftszweige von großem Interesse sind.
Leipzig receives around 3,400 physical copies of media a day. It takes about 6 weeks for them to find their way onto the shelves. Publishers must send 2 copies of each publication to the National Library. 1 copy is for Leipzig, the other copy is for the Frankfurt location. But first, each publication receives its own barcode. Then the table of contents is scanned and made available in a digital catalog. That makes researching the book easier. Next, the measurement of each book is indexed: height, width, and depth. After that, the contents are cataloged. Is it about economics? Or perhaps gardening? Finally, each receives its call number and is placed on the shelf. Each year, about 4 kilometers worth of shelves are added. By now, the library has seen 4 extensions. The 4th and most recent one has 13,000 square kilometers of space for modern shelving and is kept at 18 degrees Celsius, the ideal temperature for books. There's still room left here, but the 5th extension is already being planned.
We have a space problem, but that was part of the plan. We're scheduled to expand every 20 years, but we're a little behind.
The next building is meant to last for the next 30 years. After that, will we need even more space for printed books?
Wir werden ihn brauchen. Wir werden genau das brauchen.
Yes, we will need precisely that. Because, unlike what most people think, physical publications, books and magazines are not actually in decline. We're not seeing fewer publications than we used to, at least not significantly fewer. What has changed drastically is the number of editions printed, but not the number of titles released.
The library also stores digital copies and e-books. While simply creating digital backups might save space, it's not without its drawbacks. Conventional storage mediums don't have a long shelf life, meaning their content constantly needs to be recopied to prevent the degradation of data. These days, external hard drives are the first choice for backing up data. They can last up to 10 years depending on how often the data is copied onto them and rewritten. But that's only if they're not exposed to heat or strong magnetic fields. Floppy disks can have a lifespan of 10 to 20 years. But who still has the ability to read them? CDs and DVDs last about 5 to 10 years, if they haven't been left out in the sun. SD cards, 10 to 30 years. Now is the time to urgently digitalize VHS tapes. Celluloid films can survive a century and longer. The most reliable storage mediums remain paper, clay, and stone, of course. But not only does the storage need to be preserved, so too does the reading device and any accompanying software. The US Space Agency, NASA, learned this the hard way. Today, countless satellites orbit the Earth and deliver high-resolution images of our planet. But 50 years ago, this view of the globe from space wasn't so easy to come by. Back then, NASA had only just launched one of the first Earth observation missions. Between 1964 and 1978, 7 satellites from the Nimbus program collected meteorological data and images of Earth from space.
Nimbus will carry both daytime and nighttime camera systems.
These images of Earth are historic. These are some of the first images to show clouds and hurricanes from above, by day and by night. At the time, the footage was archived on film reels. 50 years later, researchers still require the images and data for their analyses because they provide vital insights into current climate research. And so, the 250,000 images had to be painstakingly and laboriously copied onto more modern forms of media. Otherwise, they'd be lost forever. Simon Mazarat is working to preserve a piece of local identity, the Saarland vernacular. Well, so let's hear it then, Mr. Mazarat.
I'm not qualified for that. Dialects are not something you just learn. You have to have picked them up from a young age. Many people from the state of Saarland still say Olek. And anywhere in the world, if you hear this Olek, which is an exclamation of surprise or consternation, then you immediately know that must be someone from Saarland.
Born in the Rhineland area, Simon Mazarat leads the Historical Museum Saar. Since 1870, the museum has been dedicated to the history of the Saar region, which lies along the border between Germany and France. Coal and steel have shaped the area and its people for generations. After World War I, a steam-powered hat press ushered in a new way of life, and a little Parisian flair. Visitors here can also learn about Germany's darkest chapter of history. To Simon Mazarat, it's essential to preserve and document everything.
History must constantly be revisited and re-evaluated. We're all born with a clean slate, meaning that each baby starts at zero and needs to learn empathy and how to understand the world. And to do that, you first need an understanding of the past, to grasp why things are the way they are today. If we take Fridays for Future as an example, how can we discuss climate change without knowing what the climate used to be like, or what living conditions caused it? That means that first, we always have to inform ourselves about the past, through science and research, before we can make decisions about the future. We need to have a basis for comparison.
Like in most other museums, there are plenty of objects and glass displays here. But Simon Mazarat doesn't just collect items.
We're lacking a basic sense of what life was like back then. When we see an object from a flea market, we don't know its story. But here, we also want an object's biography along with it. And we want to know how it affected people. And most of what isn't documented is that sense of what life was like, a history of mentality. As museums and archives, we have a lot of catching up to do to document this.
Oral traditions are a way of inferring that sense. The local humor, how living together was like. The actor Willy Fries gives us a little taste of what his specific Saarland dialect sounds like.
Der Nordwind und die Sonne. Der eisig Wind vom Norden und die Sonne hat eine Gewaltschaft die Sput gehabt. Jeder hat gemeint, werde stärkst. Wie der euer Mann nimmer mit einem dicken Wintermantel an vorbeikommen ist, haben sie gemeint, das können sie jetzt doch gut beweisen.
Willy Fries always spoke this dialect with his parents. Since their passing, he's had fewer opportunities to continue speaking it, which is causing many dialects to die out.
That's especially due to the fact that in the 1960s and 70s, people were told, "We don't want you speaking in your dialect." It was banned in schools. You had to speak standard German. And so an entire generation grew up with a language ban of all local dialects, so that essentially a standardization of the language could occur. This led to a massive loss of vocabulary and that essence of the way people lived.
There are at least 16 regionally distinct dialects in Saarland. For each, Simon Mazarat tracked down someone who was still able to speak it. Each of them read aloud Aesop's fable, The Wind and the Sun.
Ja und Dach, da hat sich einmal der Nordwind mit der Sonne gestriet, wer von sie zwei eigentlich der stärkst war.
The recordings of each different dialect were saved as audio files, and each file is backed up. But that's not enough to preserve it for eternity. That's why Simon Mazarat is looking for a storage medium that will last for a very long time. something as indestructible as possible that will always be readable. Is such a thing even possible? Frankfurt am Main. Elio Bortolamidi would love to get rid of what he's keeping here. Each of these rooms stores boxes full of evidence. Most are for cases of robbery, murder, or rape. To Elio Bortolamidi, collecting evidence is as much a calling as it is a career.
Everything has to be lined up correctly. Everything has to be tidy. I'm the same way at home. I can't ever leave things laying about. Everything needs to be in its place, much to the chagrin of my wife.
There are 25 rooms across 2 floors. Soon, Frankfurt's evidence storage rooms will move into a newer, more spacious building. When it comes to storing evidence, it's hard to gauge how much room will be required.
This is a shovel, and it was potentially a murder weapon used to kill somebody. The police brought it to us, and we will continue storing it here as evidence.
The public prosecutor's office determines how long the objects are stored here based on the crime and its severity. Murder has no statute of limitations.
This is an exhibit from a murder case that was pretty tragic. The case of a girl's body found in the Main River. This umbrella stand was used as a weight to sink the corpse.
Time and again, there are cases that aren't solved until years after the crime was committed. One such case happened in 1981, when a girl named Trixie was murdered in a Frankfurt shopping mall. At the time, Siegfried Manoch was a young inspector. Now he's retired. The case stayed with him for most of his professional career.
The first 2 years I'd come here at night around the same time as the crime was committed. Sometimes I'd come alone and stay for a few hours to see what was going on. I also wanted to get an impression of what was still going on in the shopping center on weekends at this hour.
It was the night of December 11th, 1981. Trixie, 16 years old, was on her way home, alone. The route took her by a shopping center. There, she encountered her murderer. He stabs and then rapes her. Despite their best efforts, investigators can't solve the case, which goes cold. Then, in 2000, DNA expert Harald Schneider of the Hesse State Police writes to all police bureaus in the state of Hesse requesting unsolved cases that still have evidence containing possible clues. At the time, genetic analysis was still a fairly novel method of forensic investigation. In the case of Trixie's murder, there was still a box stored in the evidence storage room.
Among other things, we had secured a sample of pubic hair from the victim. While examining this sample under the microscope, it was found that the hairs were stuck together. And that was a very unusual finding. That had to be a clue. It had to have something to do with the case. We were able to examine it and got a clean DNA profile that we could match with a male person. But we didn't have a suspect, so the station collected a saliva sample from every person who was somehow related to the case. One person refused to let us take the saliva sample, and that turned out to be our convicted criminal.
25 years after killing Trixie, the criminal was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Other cases are about protecting animal species, discovering customs offenses, or everyday fraud.
One smartphone, broken display, one ID card.
Several times a week, the police bring in new evidence. Each is carefully cataloged and sorted. Each case file contains a list of all the objects gathered. Red indicates a murder case.
Up here are the older cases. Those date back further. The oldest object we have, I think, is from 1958. Here you can see the files marked red start increasing. These are mostly cold murder cases, which means the murders haven't been solved yet, which means the evidence still needs to be stored.
Only after a case has been closed and the perpetrator legally convicted can the prosecutor's office decide what can be disposed of.
Wir haben hier ein Hasenkostüm.
Here we've got a bunny costume, and as you can see, there are blood stains on it. So it appears to be a connection to an offense involving bodily harm. If I take a look here, yes, this falls under dangerous bodily harm on public roads, streets, or places as defined in sections 223 or 224 in the German Criminal Code. That means whoever wore this costume likely had a confrontation with someone. This has been approved for removal, meaning we will now destroy it.
Das heißt, wir vernichten das jetzt.
Bodily fluids and human tissue don't only uncover bad deeds, they also help do good. The Biobank Dresden stores samples of blood, urine, or tumors. In total, over 1.5 million samples are taken from patients to the neighboring clinic, all of them with their donor's permission. While the clinic might consider them waste. To Heidi Eitmann, they're more precious than gold.
When we have a certain amount of samples available, they are retrieved by scientists and analyzed with various technologies based on specific research questions. That poses a challenge for our biobank because it means we have to store the samples in a way that is suitable for future analyses and technologies we aren't even familiar with yet.
Peter Mirtschink, an expert in metabolic medicine, works to improve patients' treatment at the biobank. Today, he's on his way to pick up plasma samples.
Der Vorteil einer Biobankprobe ist, dass sie sozusagen den Zustand.
The advantage of a biobank sample is that it lets us preserve the state of a patient so we can later analyze it. Once the results of the treatment are known, we can see if this sample already contains clues to whether a treatment will have been effective or not.
Gewirkt hat oder nicht, ob diese Spuren vorher schon da waren oder eben auch nicht.
Researchers can order anonymized samples of many different diseases and then develop targeted therapies. That's how cancer treatments, for example, can become increasingly better and more individualized. The preparation and storage of samples are carried out fully automatically according to a strict protocol. Here, blood samples are being processed in a centrifuge. Across Europe, biobanks operate under the same protocol to ensure that all samples are comparable.
After the centrifugation and separation process, this is what the blood sample looks like. It's now been separated into its individual components. Up at the top, this is the plasma, followed by the primary cells of interest that will be transferred to the biobank. These are what we call mononuclear cells, the nucleated cells of the blood. Below that is the separation medium, and at the very bottom are red blood cells and granulocytes, which are also part of the blood but not immediately relevant for the blood bank.
Modern, ethically regulated biobanking with unified quality standards has only existed in Germany for the past 10 to 15 years. 3 highly automated tanks store the samples of blood, tissue, or urine and keep them at a constant temperature of minus 130 degrees Celsius.
When samples are cryopreserved, they can basically last indefinitely because, in a way, the life cycle of the sample is completely suspended at minus 130 degrees. So life is in stasis, so to speak. And at that point, nothing changes anymore, and the sample cannot get any better or any worse.
For legal reasons, biobanks are only permitted to keep their samples for 30 years. But a permanent archive was never the goal. After all, the samples are intended for scientific research. So the biobanks are interconnected across Europe. Germany already has nearly 40 such facilities. Professionalizing archiving processes has helped advance medical research significantly.
Also für mich persönlich, ich bin 30 Jahre jetzt mit
I've been working in the medical field for 30 years now and still remember how we used to pull each sample out of the nitrogen tanks with gloves on. Afterwards, we'd hope that we'd be able to find them again, and sometimes after 20 years, we couldn't. Now everything is fully automated and run by robotics. That's incredible progress, and it fascinates me immensely.
Bodily fluids and diseased tissue used to be treated as medical waste. Now they can be cryopreserved and used to save lives. Permafrost is nature's form of cold storage. In Spitsbergen, the largest island in the Norwegian Svalbard archipelago, the average temperature is -7 degrees Celsius. The administrative center of Longyearbyen regularly receives precious deliveries that one day might secure humankind's food supply. Seeds from crop plants from across the globe, such as rice or wheat.
Today we are receiving seeds from about 10 different gene banks, and some smaller, some bigger. The largest deposit this time is from the United States. They actually have sent 48 boxes like this with 20,000 samples of seeds. These two are from the Italian gene bank that is sending seeds for the first time now. This is from the Israel wild cereal gene bank. They collect wild relatives to cereals. This is from Slovakia.
Åsmund Asdal has a truly biblical task, overseeing a kind of Noah's Ark for all varieties of plant seeds. The Global Seed Vault is a project managed by the Global Crop Diversity Trust. These boxes full of samples will hopefully never be opened. They remain the property of the gene bank that sent them. For security reasons, the Seed Vault was built right here in the middle of nowhere, just 1,300 kilometers from the North Pole. Longyearbyen is the world's northernmost settlement that can still be reached with a regular flight. Not many people live here. It's peaceful, and of course, cold. In 2008, our camera team accompanied the construction of the vault. It was constructed 120 meters deep into the ground. Shelves across 3 halls can store up to 4.5 million seed samples. The surrounding permafrost soil is always about -3 or 4 degrees Celsius. Inside, a cooling system keeps the temperature at a constant -18 degrees Celsius. But what if the cooling system fails?
The temperature will increase very slowly and reach the permafrost level in 1 year from now. So we have plenty of time to install new machinery, new cooling systems, and new electricity supplies and so on.
If kept at -18 degrees Celsius, plant seeds can still germinate after decades. Should natural disasters or wars destroy today's crops, new plants can still be grown from these seeds. It's like a backup for future generations.
It is amazing that you find seeds down here from Ukraine, from Russia, side by side on the same shelf, North Korea, South Korea next to each other, seeds from the United States and Iraq. Countries that are not the best friends outside, they cooperate in this important task. This is a very non-political project, and people, scientists, governments all over the world work together for conserving and distributing seeds and genetic resources.
The cold is excellent for storing organic material. But how does one preserve the essence of life?
Der Langesgang, der wo auf der Hut war. Und Wind hat ohne zu Krametschle geschluckt.
Krametschle is a word that seems to only exist in the Saarland dialect. To preserve it, Simon Mazerat from the Historical Museum Saar has submitted audio files with 16 different dialects from the Saarland region to the Research University ETH Zurich. There, Robert Gras will preserve them for eternity. And how does it sound to your ears, Mr. Gras?
Very unfamiliar. I can understand some parts, other parts I can't. I've never heard anything like it before. I'm from the Austrian state of Vorarlberg, and there we actually have a fairly strong dialect too. But since my parents aren't originally from the area, we never spoke it at home.
Robert Gras is a chemist. He works with a much tinier storage medium, DNA.
The basic idea is we can see that all information in our body is stored in DNA. in ACTG sequences in a really long molecule, where it is all saved in a certain sequence, and the underlying concept is similar to the way we store data, which is also kept in sequences consisting of ones and zeros. And once we learned what DNA really looks like, the idea arose that we could also use it to store data.
4 nucleotide bases constitute the fundamental building blocks of DNA: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. The sequence of these bases, A, C, T, and G, contains all the construction plans for any organism. DNA is very durable. The oldest DNA strand ever analyzed was extracted from the molar of a woolly mammoth found in the permafrost. It's over 800,000 years old. But how could an audio file containing speech samples and Saarland dialects be converted into a DNA sequence? No matter if it's an audio file, video file, or text file, at the end of the day, all digital data consists of ones and zeros. Robert Grass and his team developed an algorithm that converts these binary numbers into a genetic code consisting of A's, C's, T's, and G's. After that, they can construct an artificial DNA strain based on this blueprint. That's what happens in this device. These fluids are the individual DNA components: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. The computer steers how the artificial DNA strain will be constituted, and the nucleotide bases take care of the rest. It's hard to believe, but what you see dripping out here is a DNA copy of the Saarland dialect.
The problem with this is that it dissolves quickly into the water and degrades. In just a few weeks, it's no longer stable. So we need to protect it and encase it to make sure water won't affect it.
Robert Grass and his team at ETH Zurich have encased the DNA molecules in silicon dioxide, basically glass. The tiny beads are only 1/10,000th of a millimeter wide and impossible for the naked eye to see. In this casing, the DNA molecule can last the next 1,000 years at room temperature, as accelerated aging experiments have suggested. Each tiny bead can store enough DNA to save the equivalent of 2 book pages.
If we took every book from the National Library in Leipzig and saved it in DNA form, then this little speck of powder would be enough to contain it, and probably everything from the Frankfurt site as well.
Okay, da staunt man.
Wow, incredible. That's really amazing. I could put that in my breast pocket and forget all about it. This apparently contains about 43 or 44 million publications. If it's also easy to read the data stored there, then yes, this is quite a convenient invention. I think I'll take it home with me.
Unfortunately, the process of decoding all the data stored is not as convenient. To do it, you need a genome sequencer, a kind of DNA analyzing device, and a lot of time, several hours to be exact. Nevertheless, DNA storage offers a staggering amount of storage space. So, what should we save on it?
I would save Wikipedia, because in my eyes it's a snapshot of our society. Take a look at what articles are on Wikipedia. Maybe there's a lot on Justin Bieber, because it's a topic that concerns our times. There might be less on 12-tone atonal music, because perhaps it's a smaller topic of interest. Wikipedia doesn't only present information, it also, in a way, reveals what preoccupies today's people in the first place.
Now that the Saarland dialect has been stored in DNA form, it's on its way back to the historian Simon Mazerat to help him preserve a way of life. And now?
What we see here is a sliver of nothingness, and yet it contains everything relevant, everything we need. Saarland identity in a speck of powder.
In the meantime, Karl de Smedt and his colleagues have fed all 144 inhabitants of the one-of-a-kind sourdough library. The whole process takes 2 weeks and has to be repeated every 8 weeks to make sure the dough doesn't become overly acidic. Does he ever have time to rest?
Of course, I can go on vacation. I take 3 weeks of holiday. We know that we feed the sourdoughs before I leave, and I'm never longer away than 4 weeks.
Some of the cultures here he received as a shipment. For others, he had to travel halfway across the globe to pick it up himself. And there you can see that sourdough is more than just the microorganisms inside. It's also about culture and tradition. All dough consists of flour and water. But each one here comes with a unique story.
I was invited in Bulgaria actually to film the ceremony where the mother passes her sourdough to her daughter the week before she gets married. But then we found out that on the day of St. George, young girls walk into the fields to collect with their clothes the dew that you find on the grass. That water is full of microorganisms. And with that water, they'll make sourdough with it.
And so, Karl de Smedt doesn't only archive various doughs, but also the stories behind them. People like holding on to things that seem important. Sourdough, blood samples, evidence, just as much as culture, memories, and whatever the elusive essence of life may be. It all constitutes our knowledge of the world. Which parts of it do we need to preserve? What will future generations need? And what can we let go of?
You have to keep the flood in your memory. You have to keep it in mind so that you keep working through it.
Ideally, everything and always right now. But that would mean trying to stop history from progressing. That's impossible. So it's not as much about everything we want to collect as it is about what we don't need to collect.
Every house, every institution, every individual needs to figure that out for itself. Which pictures from 100 years ago are valuable and which aren't? Mostly people deem certain things more important now than in the future. But of course, that will also depend on which questions in the future we will be asking.